Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people focused around the world of commercial real estate and prop tech. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions? With Needle, you can. Come check it out at needle, NEDL.us to learn more. All right, I'm very excited today. We have the legendary Bobby Maly, CEO of the Model Group based here in Cincinnati. Bobby, thank you so much for coming to join us.
I am a legend in my house for all kids under the age of 9. But other than that, maybe not. It's great to be here, Steph.
Yeah. The Model Group in Cincinnati is synonymous with urban revitalization and redevelopment. I guess maybe you could start by giving us kind of a background of who you are and what you do and how you rose to the position that you find yourself in today.
I'm from Cincinnati and I moved to Washington, D.C. after I graduated college. I didn't have an opinion of Cincinnati positively or negatively, to be honest. I grew up in the suburbs, and so I didn't really know what a city was. I didn't really have strong feelings about Cincinnati. And moving to DC, I realized I was a Midwest kid and I really appreciated the Midwest. And I immediately started to realize that I really wish I was back in Cincinnati. And
Mhm.
at the same time, a lot of my friends, here I am wishing I was deciding after grad school. I went to grad school at the University of Maryland, and I decided I was going to move back to Cincinnati after I was done. And then all my friends are moving to Chicago and places like that. And it just really pissed me off because here I am moving away, wanting to move back. And now my best friends are moving somewhere else. So that was really the impetus for getting into the development world. I was an English lit major I got a master's in public policy and no experience or friends, not a lot of business owners in my family are entrepreneurs, and certainly no one in the development construction space or in real estate generally. So I just felt like I could get excited waking up every day trying to figure out how to be a part of repopulating our urban core, making our city a place where my friends didn't want to move away from, they wanted to move to. So that was really the genesis of me getting into career now been doing for 21 years. So I moved back and I started talking to anybody who would talk to me about what is urban development? What do you do? Informational interviews. I really didn't have much to offer anyone, no real connections. And anyway, a friend of mine introduced me to a guy named Art Reckman who started our company, and Art and I hit it off splendidly. 2.5 hours talking. I remember thinking I would sell paint. He's that kind of person. If
Yeah.
he wants to sell paint, I'm in. And nothing against selling paint. And then he had Steve's running the company now. You got to meet Steve Smith. So go meet Steve. And Steve forgets that he has this interview with me. Could not be more pissed that he has to talk to this 24-year-old kid. And we have a 5-minute interview. I get hey, I'm not really looking right now, but I'll let you know if anything comes up. It might have been 5 minutes. And I don't really remember this. Apparently, I walked back in and said, look, I'll take any job you've got. And he said, we have an opening on the demo crew tomorrow if you want to start 6 a.m. And I could not have been more excited. He thought he was getting rid of me, and I was, where do I? So I
You're
did.
like, joke's on
That
you.
was my first job. Worked with on the demo crew my first couple of weeks before I almost cut my finger off. And
Yeah.
Steve had to find a place for me in the office.
Huh. So that's amazing. You started literally at the bottom of the organization and found a way to work your way up.
I did. I literally did. I had no real skills set. Maybe hustle. That was probably all I had.
That's all I have.
Yeah, you could argue that's still all I've got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So there's all these different thoughts flowing through my head right now because you guys have done everything from tax credits to everything, I should say, involving tax credits, both historic, affordable, combining of both. I think you guys are doing a T-MUD deal right now. I guess how and why did you or did the company master that set of the market?
The second why is probably more important than the how. Honestly, they're terrible. Most of those programs are terrible to deal with. They're painful, and if you don't have to do it, don't. I think the mission of our company is to positively transform communities, and you'll probably hear me say that a couple of times in this conversation. That is the purpose of our company. That's why we exist. We always say we're in our mission is to positively transform communities. We just happen to be in the development, construction, property management businesses.
Mhm.
And so when you're trying to solve problems like taking a vacant building or vacant blocks of buildings that have been vacant for 3, 4, 5 decades, the market has failed. And so hope isn't a strategy. Anybody could have bought these buildings and fixed them up if they wanted to. And so if you want to totally transform a place, a vacant block in OTR, for example, hasn't been changed for the positive, and you have to use tools and layer them in such a way that allows the capital stack and the project to go forward that has somebody else hasn't figured out. And so we basically use those tax credits as a way to back into allowing a project to move forward. It's a big picture answer because otherwise can be pretty onerous and painful to use, but they can be very effective. They may not be efficient, but they can be very effective if you use them in the right way. So hopefully we do that.
Yeah, I've in my career, I've found myself reverse engineering the capital stacks afterwards with like year 15 affordable deals, things like that. There's soft debt on it. And the first time I heard about what soft debt was, I was like, what is that? It doesn't even make any sense, but I get what you're saying.
New market tax credits are very different than federal stored tax credits are very different than the affordable credits. They're all, you mentioned transformational mixed use development. They're all very different and it often pointed at very different outcomes. And so I think you can't really lump them all into one bucket other than to say they're hard. I mean, if you didn't have to use them, you shouldn't.
Yeah, other than to say that they are just government incentive programs that are there and available but you have to know how to use them. And then I can't even imagine the paperwork that's involved in all of that. You must have a whole staff that are just experts in that.
We do. We do. And again, you don't you don't come to work here and say, hey, I'm an expert in this. We look for smart people who share our passion and we'll teach you the other stuff. A lot of people that work here, like myself, didn't come here with business finance degrees or real estate expertise or prior experience sometimes. These days they do, but 20 years ago, not as much. But we don't care. That's not really a prerequisite. We just need smart people who care about the things we care about, and then we'll show you how to use those credits the right way.
Mhm. I'm curious, thinking about the Mercantile as your latest and greatest beautiful project here in downtown Cincinnati. It's an old office building that had been vacant for a long time, right? It had a tobacco shop in it, get great cigars there. Did you have your eye on that and said, "Hey, we can reactivate this block"? Like, how did that come about?
No, no. And the short answer is David Ginsburg introduced me to a guy named Rick Rothfuss. Rick had a law firm in what we call the Mercantile Library Development is actually 3 buildings combined into one project. It's the old Formica office building immediately adjacent to the Mercantile Library building that has, as it's one of its tenants, the Mercantile Library, which is one of the oldest membership libraries in the country, one of the top, of course. So Rick owned both buildings and we had coffee and he said, hey, I'm thinking about redeveloping the Mercantile Library building and into residential. I said, as a guy who loves seeing my city repopulated, I was enthusiastically excited about hearing that. And what can I help you do? Not officially, but what would you say? What kind of advice? So I basically just said, Rick, you either need to make it a little nicer and refill it as office or empty it. You got to pick a lane and go fill it or empty it. And so he decided to relocate office tenants into the Formica building and empty the library. Then a few months later, he came back to me and said, look, I don't know this. I'm an attorney. I'm in bankruptcy law. I've got 4 floors full of people. Can you help me do this? And so I said, sure, let's look at what that might look like. And then fast forward down the road. I'm 70 years old. I'm going to retire. And I promised my wife some time back. And would you like to just buy the building? And then at that point, I looked at it enough. Yes, I would like the building.
Mhm.
Then he said, would you like to buy both buildings? And I said, I do not want to buy an office building in the Formica. While I was getting ready to buy the Mercantile Library, COVID hit, and ultimately Rick ended up shutting down his law firm. And so what was a partially occupied building became a much more substantially vacant building. And then I could really get some real scale. We ended up buying both buildings, relocated a number of office tenants in the Formica building, so that ultimately we'll have all upper floors except for the library is residential. So that's how we got into it. It's just one of those things. Cup of coffee turned into one building, turned into two, and now we've got people moving in. Yeah.
That's awesome. It's I'm on the board of Camp Washington. I've got a building there. I'm uh, doing it just with CDF as my lender. I'm not sophisticated enough to figure out the tax credit capital stack of things, but they invited me on the board because I'm coming in and renovating this building. And they said, hey, you're in real estate. Why don't you be on the real estate committee? So they became vice president and I'm on the real estate committee like immediately. But we had our annual board meeting 2 weeks ago or something like that, or the Saturday right before Thanksgiving. And we were talking about like neighborhood revitalization. And I have come at real estate from just similar to you. I didn't know anything. I had a degree in psychology. My inspiration was my mom, who was a residential agent, and she was successful. And I was like, let me give it a shot. And so I've really had to learn it from the ground up. And so I was like, I had a long drive ahead of me. I was like, I need to listen to some books on like city planning or community planning, things like that. And I'm listening to this one called The Life and Death of the Great American City. And it's really interesting what this woman talks about. It's written in like the 50s, but she cites like Greenwich Village and the North End at that time, the North End of Boston, of being these really dense neighborhoods that have all these different parts and components. And you need old buildings, you need new buildings because you can't have all brand new construction because you're going to have almost a one type of person or tenant, commercial tenant, for instance, that is there. I'm just curious, what have been some of the because I guess the root of my question is the model group has really, and you touched on it earlier, you have really revitalized a lot of Cincinnati's urban core. And so I wonder if maybe things like that, or what are some of the, because you obviously don't go and look at a neighborhood and say, oh, yeah, we could renovate that using whatever tools are available. You clearly have a bigger vision for what you guys are doing. So, what are the inspirations behind that?
I would say we do now. Stash 20, 30 years ago, we were making mistakes left and right. We still make mistakes every day, but we we were making them on at an epic level.
Makes me feel better. Me too.
That's how we got. I've got two major partners that every time I would come to them and say, "Boys, they would come back when you make a real." But I'm fortunate to work for years with two partners like. I do think we do take a planner's approach to development now. I don't know. It's just evolved over time, but in fact, we really don't. We're not active in 20 places. We're active in a very few, and when we're all in on those places, because it just takes so much energy and so much resources. It takes all the things, all your best problem solving to make those work. Like Walnut Hills or Over the Rhine is not really a place; it's 4 or 5 places. And so Pendleton is its own challenge in its own terrific place. That's very different than Philly Market. That's very different than Washington Park
Right.
or up on Mulberry. So we've really had lots of energy into multiple parts of it. But you're right. I think you have to have a bigger vision, and there are so many factors, pieces that come into play when you think about what does that place look like. When I look out the back window at 1800 block of Vine Street, it looks a lot like 12th, 13th and Vine did 15, 20 years. It's deja vu. It looked, it's vacant building, which invites negative activities like crime and selling drugs and trash, and it it just perpetuates. And so there's really only one way through that, and that is to fill these buildings with positive uses, positive stakeholders, light back on the first floor of the street, the right types of retail on the first floor, which helps give identity of the neighborhood physically, and then filling the upstairs with as many people as you possibly can. We believe in filling them with a lot of different kinds of people. I think that's one of the things I like about cities. It's harder to do in the suburbs, but you can have real density and real diversity within blocks and in down in your urban core that just creates a different level of interaction of different kinds of people and different incomes. It's just hard to do in the suburbs. We believe in there's different ways to do it. It's just one of the ways, one of the things I think makes us a little unique.
In lifting a neighborhood, what comes first? Is it because in my opinion, you need heads in beds, so to speak. You need people living there. And then the people will stimulate the thought of business to say, okay, yeah, I can support a pizza shop there because there's enough traffic. Curious what
100%.
your thought.
Yeah. There's definitely, you're going to run into the chicken and the egg. And that's why for us, my short answer is I agree with you. If you don't ultimately have density, people living there, whatever you do is not fail. Look at Main Street, starts and stops and over the Rhine decades. It was a bar district, and bar districts are temporal. They don't last forever. And so the energy comes and goes, that have to reinvent itself. If you don't have people living there, stakeholders, what those commercial spaces are recycling through a different life cycle, it's going to. So I agree with you. I would say that what we have come to believe is that if we're going to take on one building in a place, we're going to take on phase one, phase two, phase five, phase seven. And that's what we're doing because you just have to commit to such a long-term approach
Mhm.
because you can't solve all the problems with one or two or three phases. Part of that is density, beds, as you, and part of that is just you need different kinds of uses. You need to connect multiple blocks. If you do all the right things in one block and everything around it is good, you're going to die on a vine. So you have to get a certain critical mass. So it means you need 2 blocks and 3 blocks. We can't do unlimited resources. So it takes us 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 phases. And then we just
Mhm.
keep going and building on what we've already started. I do think you have to have, as you said, a vision of where you think you want to end up and then just total commitment to it seems riskier, but since it's in actuality, it's a lot less. It's more risky to do one and hope, let's see how it goes before we start number two. You're too late. Number two needed to start right after you started building number one. And so we're working on phase 2, 3, 4 when we're under construction with phase one.
Yeah, I've got a building right next to mine that needs to be redeveloped, we'll say. And I'm trying to finish this first one first, but I've got neighborhood engagement from probably going to work some sort of deal with the property owner, say, hey, just throw it in. We'll turn this back into something happening. So I get what you're saying. And then there's a chunk of properties that I want to buy. And I think you guys have walked them actually, Sydney. Why is density a bad word? Why are people afraid of density, do you think?
A good question. I think when I look at the zoning changes that were being discussed, or recently. I think people don't like density because it means there's change. They usually when people don't like density, it means they don't like change or they don't like what some of those changes will bring. And
Hmm.
sometimes that might be people that don't look like it. Sometimes that might be I've been here, I like it quiet. Some of it, but the reality is you need to constantly reinvent yourself as a neighborhood. You need to constantly breathe new life into old buildings, whether that's residential or commercial spaces. If you have an established neighborhood, but the commercial spaces get tired and the owners aren't reinvesting in them, it starts to run down and it drags on the entire neighborhood. So
Hmm.
I just think that I'm a big believer that neighborhoods are very dynamic and they're always changing. But I think it's around change. I've found is whether you use the word density or anything else, it's a lot of people don't like change almost any, which is ironic because the change is occurring around us, so we have to keep changing. But
Right.
that's my
I'll say this in the most loving way. The problem with Cincinnati is Cincinnatians because they don't want to change. Oftentimes, I feel like they can't see the forest through the trees. And you guys are an anomaly in town because you're an in town developer, whereas most of the time you have out of town developers who can see a site and say, hey, I think I can put this here. And they do it. And oftentimes it's been picked over by other develop in town, but that's never going to work as a for instance. So I
well.
hope I don't.
There is what we. I've certainly been victim to that myself, where I'm like too much. I will
Yeah.
never work there. And then lo and behold, somebody else does it. So I'm not immune. That's for sure. I I think you're right in some sense that we don't like change. I don't think we're that different from most places. I think we tend to be a little slower. So that's not always a bad thing. It's one of the reasons I like everyone's in a hurry in DC. Too much in a hurry to be neighbors, too much in a hurry to have real connectivity and community. And I felt absence in a place like Washington, DC. I like Cincinnati. And it drives me nuts, Dash. But you sometimes you just want, come on, wake up. You gotta go. But it's a double-edged sword. You can't have the positives without the negatives.
Mhm. How, one of the questions here is about community engagement. There's that development in Over the Rhine that was hung up by the community for 10 years, something like that. How do
Liberty,
you, yeah, how do you engage the community so that they don't hijack you like that?
not every community is so different. It's so different. And 21 years now and over the Rhine, and the community council component of the community is very different than it was 5 years ago. Is black and white difference than what it was 20 years. Those are always changing too. I think what we try to do is we try to engage different stakeholder groups early on, business groups, community council groups, advocacy groups, and ask, what do you think the problems are? And just try to be good listeners. We at Model, we try to be good listeners, and some we're better than others, but we try to be good listeners. And that doesn't mean that we agree with everyone. That doesn't mean that you're waiting for a consensus because no consensus exists. There's no such thing as 100% consensus in any place in the world. And so if you're waiting for that, you're going to be disappointed and you'll have paralysis and nothing will occur. But you do want to understand, take the temperature and understand where the predominant views of what the problems are before you start declaring what the solutions are. At least that's the way we try to approach it. And I think when you do that, at least more slowly, I think Stephen Covey would call it sharpening the saw. When you're going to end up at an endpoint much faster if you start more slowly than if you just say, here we go, we're doing our thing, and here's the solution, regardless of what you think the problem is, and here we go, and we know what's best. Maybe you're right. Take you longer, and you're gonna be at cross purposes with a lot of people who might otherwise be your allies. I think it really is just listening, and a lot of times we don't go to places after we hear it. We'll listen, and if we're so opposed, what we think is opposed, our purpose, our culture, our values are that different, or we're gonna just have a complete fight. We'll just avoid it.
Hmm.
We make choices like that all the time.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because you're never going to have everyone be your supporter. It's, it is development, urban development, especially when you're trying to revitalize places, is so freaking hard. If you, it's hard, people aren't behind and supporting it. If you're adding difficulty and fights at every step along the way, that just aren't worth fighting, then you probably should pick.
Hmm. Yeah, find somebody that actually wants you there and wants to help facilitate what you're doing. So it
Yeah,
sounds
or
like
that's more aligned with what you want to do. They might not be wrong, just might not be what the way we see it.
it sounds like the an important well, before you even embark on a project is to go and make sure you hear what people have to say, take that feedback, and then you realize, hey, is this something that is going to be possible
Yeah.
with all the stakeholders there? That's really good advice.
My partner Steve has always used Venn diagrams. You got three circles and they intersect, and the little piece in the middle where they all intersect is it can be pretty small. And what can we do? What should we do? And what do people want us to do? Maybe there's a fourth circle of what's even feasible,
Mhm,
and it's a pretty tight circle. So you should, maybe you don't get too technical, but you should have some idea of what you want to do. The community already thinks the problems they need to solve are, and if they aren't aligned there, then it's going to be tough sledding.
mhm. Do you think that it's maybe easier to get consensus because you're oftentimes and you have done some beautiful new construction projects, but oftentimes you're revitalizing these older buildings where it's okay, here's a shell or here's a building that needs to be gutted. We can keep the structure, but is that part of it? Or because sometimes you think of the classic developer coming in wanting to build 200 and I think I heard 268 units is the ideal development from Trammell Crow.
Hmm.
That's what he figured out. But that's a garden style community with X number of buildings and roofs. So, like, is there a difference there? I guess is my question.
First of all, I've done none of those 268 unit deals in my 21 years, and I don't know, 150, 200 projects we've done. I get the point. The point is that if you're a developer, it's scale, operations, you're focused on the building. It makes sense. It makes sense. If you're just thinking about the real estate, what's the right scale? Got one roof, how many units can I get under it? And have the right operational efficiency for staff. I get it. That's just if you're focused on, if your mission is to positively transform communities, then that's just not a luxury you get to think. Yeah, I think you're right. I guess I haven't thought about that as much. We take on a lot of old buildings. That's a problem. It's a vacant building. It's a problem today. So someone's probably going to be more excited to hear me talk about what we might do with that problem that exists
Mhm,
at the gate. So maybe you're right. That's probably an advantage we have. We've become very good at historic rehab. Maybe I underestimated the part of it. But yeah, yes, I think that's helpful. But
mhm,
you know what? Historic buildings, I think of a place like Over the Rhine, or we spend a lot of time in Walnut Hills now, or I'm in downtown, what we call the Landing in Fort Wayne, Dayton, the Dayton Arcade, and the buildings next door to that one. These are signature type buildings, architecture. I always say, let's say you're comparing Cincinnati to many other cities, Charlotte, North Carolina, which has grown quite a bit,
mhm,
mostly on the back of large banking industry. You get dropped out of a helicopter into Charlotte blindfold, and you land in the street. You don't know where you are. It's not an interesting place, in my opinion. It's new construction. The culture is actually pretty good. There's a lot of new people and energy and entrepreneurs, but physically, it's just to me an appealing place. You could be anywhere. It's generic. You could be in pick one of 10 cities. When you're dropped out of the helicopter into Over the Rhine, you cannot mistake that neighborhood for anywhere else. I think it's one of the things that is makes Over the Rhine a very important neighborhood for our whole region. It's one of the places that makes us very different than all other places. There truly is nothing like it. You could have a block like it, but you do not have blocks and blocks. It is the largest collection of Italian architecture in the country. It is the largest historic district intact in the country. It's different. And so using what you have gives the kicks is a big part of that character, and just wiping, building new possible. That's what we think. You can use that as a
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I've met and interacted with a lot of people on your team, and they're all great, frankly. So the question is, how do you lead and empower all these great people that you surround yourself with?
I've got two great mentors that came before me as the third CEO at Model, and the two guys before me are still here, and they were here leading a long time before me. So it's a lot easier for me than it was for them. I think, that, and I would say, I guess I'll just tell you how then it all comes from Art and Steve. The first thing is Art. When you look at the values of our company, the first one is partnership. We have other values too. If I had to pick one, it'd be pretty easy. Partnership. We're in long-term relationships with people. That is art. That is art personified. Art. You understand that immediately. And so we've just all embraced that as the most important thing we do here. We are in when you believe that at your core, you choose to not work with certain people, or you choose to work a certain way. You rarely hit home runs. You never hit grand slams. You often hit doubles, singles, doubles, maybe a triple every now and again, because you're trying to find lots of win-win solutions where other people are doing well while you're well. And that usually means you're not grand slams. But it sure does create a stable way to build your company over the long haul. And it allows us to develop positive relationships throughout the city and community that we're in. It gives us a positive way to start the next project. It, in fact, invites the next project from people coming to us. The second thing I would say is probably comes from my other partner, Steve. Steve is the CEO who discovered our mission to positively transform communities. We talk about it all the time. We always, and if you ever read much of Simon Sinek, he's my favorite author, but he wrote a book called Start With Why. We do here. We start with why. Our mission is to positively transform communities. We just happen to be in the development construction business. Our mission is not to achieve investor return or develop building or construct X millions of dollars per year. And when you approach it that way, it just changes the way you think about what you do. So I think starting with why and what's our purpose allows us to attract other people who believe what we believe. And when you add enough of those people who believe in long-term relationships and are passionate about helping positively transform something around them and want to come to work every day, a paycheck, doing something they believe in and are excited about, then honestly, the other parts are much easier. Everything else is easier. And that sounds simpler than it is. We've screwed that up over the years, and we tried a merger 15 years ago. It didn't go very well. We learned we had a culture and what it wasn't and what it was. And that's been a painful learning over decades. But I would say that's the number one thing, is finding people. By the way, this is an easier job for Bobby than it was for Steve, and an easier job for Steve than it was for Art. We know who we are. And so now I just have to go find the people who believe what we believe.
That's great.
So hopefully, Stash, when you run into people who work for Model, they're all different people. They're all different ability and things. Hope there's a common thread through all of us, or at least the people who worked here a long time. I think there's a common thread. And it starts with two things.
Yeah. Like I said, I had a chance to meet a whole bunch of your team when we were marketing the 580 building. They all came through, and sometimes people come through with, oh, I just with a chip on their shoulder or an attitude or whatever it is. none of that. They're all kind and just you could tell that they were genuinely nice and good people and good at what they did. Yeah, no, it's
That doesn't surprise me. It makes me very happy.
good. They paid me to say that. No, I'm
That's
kidding.
perfect. Fine, dude.
Yeah. I guess what do you see on the horizon for construction and development, revitalization over the next, I don't know, year or 5 years or longer?
It's a pretty general question. I am glad that inflation is 30% a year in construction. That was not survivable. I'm a little nervous about inflationary environment going forward on what happens in the next year and 12 months of Congress. Pretty worried about it. Nothing I can do to control it. Absent that, we're city guys and gals. So I just we believe in the long-term health and importance of cities. And there's peaks and valleys, work from home. I think everyone announced cities are dead, but probably a little premature. Cities have been thriving for millennia and plagues and whether it's COVID or the Black Plague, cities have been surviving for millennia. And I think it's because when you have density, you have great energy, a need for the most inspirational architecture. You have places attract people. They're a magnet for people, and it's a virtuous cycle of more people helps attract more people because the people want to be around people,
Hmm.
and that's part of what makes cities so great.
And when you reactivate a block like the Mercantile to take it full circle, that's going to bring people back in, whether they're working from home or not. Maybe they work right across the street or 2 blocks away, something like that. So,
Yeah, and when you add the block of the Reborn next to Fountain Square, next to a U.S. Bank building reinvested in, and you start the Fountain District and what's happening with conventions.
yeah,
This is where 1 + 1 equals more than two.
couple hotels coming across the street,
Yes,
theoretically,
good
hopefully.
complementary uses, energy at night, out of town energy, people coming to work every.
Yeah.
I'm downtown a lot, and never seen more people since before COVID, and it's exciting to see. And I think that's when you get 1 + 1 equals more than two, and that's really when what we do in the Merc can have a much bigger impact when you leverage the other things that are going on. Yeah, it's fun to see.
I saw a
I think
post this
that's
morning.
that's why we're in the next 5 years. You said we're not changing our course in terms of the types of stuff we're doing. We have doubled, tripled down on what we're doing down and over the Rhine and Walnut Hills and downtown Fort Wayne. It's where we are. We don't believe it's going to change, and we think there are big challenges and didn't exist 3 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But we still believe what we're doing is the right challenge to take urban one from an urban.
Mhm. I was gonna say I saw a post this morning from a friend of mine in Chicago, and I took the train in, and it was full. It was standing room only from the suburbs into downtown, and it was all types of people. So, to your point, cities aren't dead. They just it's like with retail. Everybody said retail was dead in the mid 20 teens, and no, it just had to go through like a settling out period,
Totally
you
agree.
could say.
And
So,
that's just happens all the time. I think, I actually think, I believe that cities are more important than they've ever been because we're so much more isolated. You and I are doing this. We're not even sitting in the same room, which is
no.
good video, maybe, right? You can record it easier and cheaply with a platform that exists for anybody in Zoom, but we're not in person. And so whether it's COVID or work from home or everyone, the cell phone that can hold every possible thing you could do, you could work, you could play, you can communicate. We're just naturally more isolated. And so I think people just need to be around people. It's never going to change. And so when you have this sort of fracturing of our society, technology, all it does to me is give more demand for what a healthier environment provides, which is exciting energy to be around. So
Mhm.
that's why we're totally committed to, at least from what model's doing. I can't tell you what the next 5 years looks like. elsewhere. Dash, you're focused. We haven't changed direction.
Good. You guys are doing great work, and you really have helped to revitalize the community in the city. I really appreciate you spending some time with me this afternoon.
My pleasure. It's been a blast.
Awesome. That's it. That's all I got. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too, Steph.
All right. Thanks, Bobby.